Hello again. In this short video lecture, we're going to be talking about some of the highlights of ICD-10-CM diagnosis coding. We always talk about the different coding systems. Most of you are familiar with ICD-10, the diagnosis coding. In other words, the why somebody comes into the office. ICD-10 PCS is similar, but it's hospital-based procedure coding. And then, of course, we have CPT for the medical office. All these coding systems have guidelines, conventions, and have different guidelines for different things that we'll get into in the course and in your coding courses. ICD-10-CM codes are reported for all diagnoses, regardless of where the healthcare setting is. This includes mental health, physician offices, outpatient care, standalone clinics, inpatient psychiatric, home health, hospice, and any facility that collects coded data. The World Health Organization has ICD-10. The CM is for the clinical modification used here in the United States. ICD-10 PCS are procedure codes. These are reported by inpatient hospitals only. And as mentioned, CPT and HCPCS level 2 codes are reported for any procedure or service in other healthcare settings, meaning primarily physician offices, clinics, and the outpatient setting. Again, it's a procedure. The diagnosis code covers the reason for the visit. The procedure code says what was done. And procedures are done in a multi-axle. In other words, each of the 7 characters that you see here in 047K04Z provide a unique code and is good for one specific procedure. With this new multi-axle 7-character system, this allows for new procedures to be easily incorporated as new codes. Right now, it has more than 87,000 7-character alphanumeric procedure codes. And again, you always hear ICD-10-CM and PCS referred to as one system. It's really two: CM for the diagnosis, PCS for the hospital procedures. Computer-assisted coding is something that we hear a lot about in health information, and basically this is using computer systems to mine for certain key terms and then apply codes. For single diagnosis coding, it does seem to work. However, hospital-based procedures usually require more judgment, discernment, and this system is not quite ready for prime time, at least according to many coding individuals. ICD-10 replaced the legacy ICD-9-CM system. It's no longer being used. We have crosswalks, as some call them. A better term is the general equivalent maps. So the GEMS. And what the GEMS do is basically take an ICD-9 code and translate it to an ICD-10-CM code. It's not a one-to-one match. That's why the term crosswalk is often not used, and instead people use the general equivalency mapping, otherwise known as the GEMS. Then again, we have the alphabetic index and the tabular. These are 22 chapters, and by using the main terms, the subterms, the qualifiers, and knowing the different guidelines and conventions, we can come up with valid codes for any reason for a healthcare encounter. And again, here's an example. This is probably old hat to a lot of you who've already seen coding all the main terms in bold and alphabetic order is illustrated here. We also have a subdivision, if you like to think of it that way, the index to diseases and injuries, the neoplasm table, the table of drugs and chemicals, and the index of external causes. Again, main terms are in bold, subterms or essential modifiers, if you will, follow, not in bold, with an indent. Second qualifier, another indent. Third qualifier, and then the fourth qualifier. Pretty straightforward. The neoplasm table, basically we go to the neoplasm by site, and then we have to know whether the cancer is a malignant primary, malignant secondary, carcinoma in situ, benign, uncertain, or unspecified behavior. Important thing that people sometimes forget about with ICD-10-CM coding is using both the alphabetic and the tabular. The alphabetic index and the tabular, you can't just code out of the alphabetic index. You need to read the tabular, and here are some of the things that you see why. Descriptions about width, excludes, includes, code also, and other essential notes that you'll miss if you don't use the tabular. And that's all I have for you. We'll see you online. Bye now.